Michael, I'm really excited to be here with you today because we're in our new home.
Yep.
And this has been a labor of love to get this in place. I know you've done many recordings in here, but it's my first shot. So this is exciting, a new chapter for us. And really appreciate the team that helped put this together. They did a good job.
Yeah, they sure did. It's good to be with you, Jay.
Yeah, and there's a lot to talk about. I want to start with you, just your personal life.
All right.
You've had quite a month and a half. Some good, some bad. Some health issues in your family that could have been a real distraction, but everything's going well. And at the same time, just a lot happening with your sons, and I got to be a part of that. And so the last couple of weeks with your son's basketball team here in Ames and the state series, got to see him play last week to go to state. And after the game, it was a really intense game, really fun. But I got to see him standing side by side with the coach, and their arms around each other. And, 40-year difference or something like that. But it looked like two old farmers looking out on their field. But it was an image of character. And I know as a father, it's a challenge. It's probably easier this time than the first time because you've done it. But it's always hard to take your kids through those steps. So what's your experience been like with your journey through basketball these last few weeks and just your life? And talk about, too, about with everything that's going on in your family. It's just part of it.
Yeah. Well, you do mention some of the health concerns that have been in the family. My wife's knee has been a problem, and her tendon in particular, and that was re-injured now. Thought we were through it. And so that's quite a setback. Our households are our base, our stability is, and so that's been trying, but you recognize that the things you can't control, you can't overthink them, and the things you do have control over, you can renew your mind around where you need to put your focus. And so it's healthy for us, but boy, it's difficult. But again, that's where the church family comes in, because you share these things with the church family, you process them with the family, and it's a beautiful thing. Concerning parenting and concerning the season of basketball, what was the question?
Your experience is going through this time with second son, and it's been a fun ride for me as just part of the family, but what's it like as a father-son?
My goodness, yeah, there's so much to say. That's why I asked for what's the specificity around the question, because I think as a father, this is my second son. They both have really loved the game of basketball. They've learned so many things from the sport: hard work, working as a team, and not just individual, following leadership, the ups and downs emotionally in a single game, in a season, in a couple years of over a couple years of time, so up and down, short and long term, dealing with adversity. Being in the right headspace, mentally being what they say, we got to get locked in. Well, what they mean is be in the right headspace. So those things have been a part of the process. But I think probably the bigger things is helping our young men. They're asking a singular question, I think, subconsciously, and that is, do I have what it takes to be a man in this world? Do I have what it takes? Because we're telling them they're practicing being an adult in our families, but do they have what it takes? And last night after the game, we went to the state or Final 8. Great game, lost by 3, but a great game. Played so well against a really good team. Everything to be proud of, but we got some time together and over dinner, and you get these moments of time, and he said, "Are you proud of me?" And that's a moment that you cherish, and a moment that you are, as a father, you're engaging in dialogue in this young adult age that they're in, and you're cultivating your dialogue. Dialogue is so key, Jay, during these years, because you can't force them to obey rules. That stuff is out the window. They have to learn to live by principles, and they learn principles through dialogue. And so then to have them say, are you proud of me? And to be able to be in dialogue with them enough and to say, man, I couldn't be more proud of the man you're growing into. Not win or lose, not more points or less points individually or in some sort of stat line or some sort of division of what level is happening after high school. But just, I'm proud of the man you're growing into. So those are some of my quick reflections, Jay, over parenting.
Watching the game, not a real basketball aficionado. I don't understand a lot. I sat by one of our network men behind me that knows it intimately. So he was telling me all about it. But I'm looking out there, and your son's guarding a guy that's a giant.
Oh, he's 6'10", 280.
Yeah. I mean, he was a giant. And he's in there contending. And he's not a match physically, but he used all his resources to make it work and never gave up. Character shows at every turn, helping guys up, giving the official the ball, having conversations with the officials respectfully, but also showing his, emotions on the court, but in a controlled way. I thought about texting, say, proud of you, but I'm always proud of it. It's not content, but it's just like, I'm so impressed by how he handles himself on and off the court. But that's a public way of seeing that. The other part is, there was a lot of people there. His family.
Yeah.
I thought about it, had to be 40 or 50 Abram fans there. And that was impressive.
Yeah, we have to get our across all, and that's the joy, Jay, of the church can and should be a family and support all of its members, all of its sons, all of its daughters, helping our daughters become women, helping our young men become men. And so when they say, "Are you proud of me?" we're saying, You're growing into the man that's on mission.
Well, in our orientation, and somebody said, "Well, we're here to watch." I said, "My grandson," metaphorically, but he's my grandson.
Yeah.
Same as Jack, my real grandson. They're the same in my head. Yeah. There's biological differences. Abrams comes from a stronger line, maybe, but but yeah, and that family of families, and just that we're all knitted together. Mm-hmm. By our inheritance. And a little aside there, just that sense out of Hebrews is the will's been written. And witnessed. So
that's the fourth exhortation you're talking about in Hebrews there. It says you have a new will. It's in the gospel and the law has been written on your hearts and on your mind, and you've been given a new will. That's such a beautiful exhortation, that fourth one. It pulls all the first three together, and it's basically part of what its implications are. Is why are you upset about anything? Mm-hmm. Why are you mournful about anything? Why are you sad about any heinous crime or sin of any sort? Why are you upset at all?
Yeah,
you have a new will. It's already been done. It's already taken care of.
Yeah, Hebrews just keeps amazing me. One of the things you mentioned. You ran into one of your former leaders, a person that helped develop you early in your church life, at an ag show, and he's got a terminal diagnosis. How did you process it? And the reflections you had about, you may not have thought this, but in my head is, did this help you think about the people that had their fingerprints on you to put you in your ministry today? I was thinking he had an influence. And I was thinking all the people along the way. Did you think about that at all?
Yeah, I did some. What happened was, as you said, I went to an agricultural farm show. I haven't been to one in years, probably 10 years.
Well, nothing ever changes in agriculture.
So I went to this farm show with a friend, and I saw this man, and we chatted small talk for just a few minutes. I'm not great at small talk, and so I'm really ready to leave, and he gets a bit emotional and just wants to tell me one more thing. So he pulls me and just says that he's got just months to live. He says, I just want you to know I just have a few months. And I haven't seen him in probably 15 years. But he was a man that very early on, in the first month of being in that church when I was first married, he was a man that encouraged me around leadership. And he was a man that also helped get some of the resourcing for what I'm doing today with us into that church. And so he encouraged me around leadership, and then got this paradigm at least introduced through some books to that church. And so he prayed for me multiple times beside his combine out in the field.
Wow.
I remember. So he had a fingerprint certainly on an aspect of my life early on when I was 22 years old, 23 years old at the time. And so not to have seen him for so many years and then have him say, hey, this is my last few months here. It makes you think about how God used him mightily. Had he not done a handful of those things, you and I wouldn't be sitting together. We're all connected, whether we know it or not. It's a tangled web that we're all connected in.
When being older, I hope you could see his legacy, because you're his legacy, or part of it. And which I'm thinking now it's your turn, and over the past, since our last podcast, you've been very busy in our network locally, working with parents around the idea of contending. Thinking of your son, Abram, I can watch him contend on the court, but then I also watch him contend in the family of families. And that's an important emphasis. And why do you think that's so critical right now?
Well, it is so critical in our culture right now because so much of Christendom is apathetic and lukewarm, unfortunately. And the place where we really are learning these principles is from Hebrews and from 1 Peter and from 2 Peter and from Jude and from James. Peter's whole circle of letters, we may call them. Jude talks about they're in a double bind. The culture's against them and the religious of the day, of the religious in their circle, which is the Hebrews or the Old Testament religious system, paradigm, if you will, is really pushing against them, calling them to come back to the Jewish traditions. And the culture, of course, is saying that what they're doing is silliness. So they're in a double bind. And Jude is telling them, like 1 Peter is telling them, to contend. Mm-hmm. He's telling them to build a stronger mind in it, to build a complex mind, to build a mature mind. And in our culture, so that's where we get it from. So then when you take that then and tie us to the culture we live in today, we've a lot of parenting, we can fall into this trap of we've got to protect our children from a lot of these bad things in the world, as if
the world's dangerous out there.
The world's dangerous out there, philosophy. And that's, so while maybe 0 to 12, some of that is okay, certainly when you get into that final 6 years of, or at least that third chapter, we'll call it, it's not the final years because you're parenting your whole life in some sense, but 12 to 18, they've got to practice being an adult. You've got to give them freedom to practice, freedom to make mistakes, freedom to make decisions. They have to start learning the principles and living by the principles, internalizing the principles. And they've got to contend. And contend means to fight for the faith. It means to begin to prioritize their life around the faith. And it's a discernment that they have to begin to build their own mind, their own faith, and contend for it. So that's where we get it from. That's how we wrote a paper on it. And we talked about with our whole network and all of the parents. It was a productive part of the month. It was a hard part of the month takes a lot of work to get to that point, but that resource is available, and it was a productive part of maturing our network and all of our parents here.
It's a good paper. And I was thinking it was being past that stage, and now I'm working for generations behind me to help with that those last years in the household, your young adult, when you're making a run at it, you're in the protection of a household. And so part of the conversation, when you're young, you can run in the ditch and then come back out without being a serious crash. And if you don't get those things worked out early, the cost for your mistakes get more and more expensive as you go through life. Mm-hmm. Choosing a wrong spouse, choosing a wrong lifestyle, making all these decisions. If you don't learn it young, it's a lot harder and more expensive.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that translates too, then, working with our leaders. We spend a lot of time together, you and I and all the leaders, both the senior elders and the church leaders. But I think your framework you're coming from is expansion and building a solid senior elder team, bringing along the church leaders. Why is it so critical to spend that time with them around the idea of expansion?
Oh, yeah, I see where you're chasing. We meet once a month, and more than that, but collectively with all of our leaders and our senior elders, and then we also just meet with our senior elders. So why is it so important to have the unity and solidarity across that? And why focus on expansion, you're saying? Well, similar to how parents want to have children, in the same way, God wants his family to expand and have more children too. And so we need to be starting new families.
Good callback.
but families need leaders. They need parental units. They need leadership. And so I've been pushing the edges of some new families we can start, and that's in tension at times with the modal leaders or the elders and some of the senior elder. It can't, all of it, expansion and establishment is at some level always in tension. And
hopefully
yeah.
We're doing our work.
Yeah, and so I think the senior elders will always push back some on me and say, we're going a little bit too fast, or you're taking too many risks out there. And I'm suggesting, hey, we need to take more risks, and I'm kind of at the other end of that spectrum. So I think it's good to push the edges of expansion. We need to be expanding our churches, both strategically, but also spontaneously. Mm-hmm. There's a both and there as well. And even some of the spontaneous stuff is obviously, by the nature of it, it's unplanned, and that's even more risky than even the strategic stuff. And we've only really been talking about the strategic stuff, the more planned stuff. So it's important to have that unity. Go back to the Petrine Circle. 1 Peter 3:13 through 5:14 addresses this very directly about the need for elders and apostolic leaders to be in solidarity in the community, in the network. Because like there's a social structure in the household, in a church family, as you have multiple church families, you have a network or a cluster, there's also a social structure there that the apostolic leaders talk about in their letters, and that is important for ongoing unity and of mission out, and for health inside.
Well, selfishly, I've been your elder from day one. Mm-hmm. Other people might share that, but I know in the conversation we have our city elders, senior elders, and it's interesting because your city elders, because we've been together from day one, mm-hmm. and got to see the anointing, really, in my mind, of your time with us, are on that. Let's push. But we're both older, and we see the urgency. And so it can be really challenging for us as the city elders to watch the other generations come behind, because we forget that we had to do that too.
Yeah.
And so you're spending time developing that. That's encouraging.
Yep, we're taking time to do that. And Jay, that you were insinuating, there's tension in it.
Oh, obviously.
There's arguments. There's But I just go back to some of the Petrine Circle things. I just can't help it because it's so helpful, those principles. And it says to provoke one another. Provoke one another. In Exhortation 3, he says to provoke, which is to stimulate, to challenge, to, it reminds me of the Acts 4, the parasia that's used there as well. So it's not without conflict. It's not without tough conversations on and on, but it's worth it.
Well, if it wasn't about, it's high stakes. People care. So it should have high emotion, high pressure, and high tension. You said something that just popped into my head, the idea of the paradigm. Because that's what we're battling for. We're contending for the paradigm, the new paradigm. And again, we'll flip back to Hebrews, the new paradigm. It's right there.
Yeah.
And you see it in Hebrews, just like we're doing here, we're battling for the paradigm. And so you have to have they had the Hebrews author telling them, that's, I think, what you're trying to accomplish with your leaders.
Yeah.
Then internal, external, you turn right around and you did it with world leaders as well, right? For their gathering and their networks. It's been a busy month. I don't know much about what's been going on there. So what have you been doing with the leaders for around the skills of the gathering and helping them with their networks?
So we've been having leaders, well, we had it this morning again, was our last one as well, but we had about 200 and some leaders from 20-some countries that would come. They came for 8 sessions around the skills of building dynamic and effective symposiums in our gatherings. So what that means is discussion. How to have effective and dynamic discussions. You have the meal in the gatherings, and then you have your discussion or symposium in the Greek sense. That would, and we talked about 8 skills. We started with how life is really conversion is a lifelong process, and we ended with habits that a leader has to have around his own listening skills, his own writing skills, his own talking skills, his own reading, their own reading, him or her reading skills. So, boy, so much to say, but it was a productive time with all of them. I talked with some of the leaders afterwards, did a debrief again, and we're going to pick another aspect of it back up again, probably in 6 months. So more to come in that skill development. There's skills that all relate specifically around 1 Corinthians 11:17 to 14:40, which is where you see the bulk of the gathering happen.
Not so much as, God wired us to be dialogical. We talk. It's communication, how we relate. Full communication. But that's the part that for me is a challenge sometimes because I miss the softer communication, the body language, the nonverbals. And that's so critical. If you're going to run a powerful meeting where people's lives change, where they can survive provoking and sharpening. We just did it here as well. We went through those skills.
Yeah, we did.
With leaders here. And it makes a difference in the gathering.
Yeah, so we split the skills up in particular into 3 broad areas, and that is listening skills, which has a subset of so many different skills underneath of it, but listening skills, and then influencing skills. So you should be able to talk about everything and anything if you're doing a good job listening and setting the culture of listening, observing, repeating back, bunch of skills underneath that. Then you're influencing as a leader. So you don't let everything just get talked about and not influenced, but you're influencing towards a direction. And then you're equipping them with the didache around a set of principles is the didache, which is Christ's wisdom. And so you're influencing anything and everything they say, tying it, influencing and equipping it towards pieces of Christ's wisdom, which is the apostles' teachings, the faith, the deposit, the didache. So it's a fairly simplistic to explain. Of course, in real life, it's just infinitely complex and messy. But
it takes practice.
It takes practice. But once you conceptually understand what you're doing as a leader, I think that's where you can get a lot of leaders quite quickly, and they can be on that journey, and we can start new families all the time.
Yeah, I've got a great example of my influencing skills as a young leader with my wife. And I said, submit, woman.
And
you can imagine how that was received.
not well.
He goes, lead, man.
Lead, man.
So it is more complex than that, and it does
Yeah.
take more skills. Shift now to, there was a small activity went here 2 weeks ago, the International Summit.
A small activity, did you say?
Small party work. A few people showed up in town. And in that, we hear this over and over again, and I heard it so often, and I suspect you did too, about the impact of coming to town and living in our homes.
Yeah.
What's your impression you got from the people at the conference? What's that do for them?
Oh my goodness. It shows them how real people prioritize their life around Christ's mission, and how it can happen not only just from leaders, how it can happen across the whole breadth, from people that are 8 years old who talked at the conference. We had an 8-year-old who you've been leading, all the way up to 88 years old.
Yeah, we had 8 to 88.
And how everyone can have all things in common. Have all things in common in Acts 2, 42 to 46 there, where they had all things in common. Well, what does that mean? They had it's the same thing that 1 Peter 3 talks about and 4 talks about arm yourself with the same intentions. It's a unity and solidarity around a mission. And you can prioritize your 168 hours in the week across the whole network of people and be on mission. I think that's what it does for people. They can't believe that it can actually get down to everybody.
Oh, I heard that so often. We just can't do this. And one of our young men said it before. Is like, yeah, we can. It's really simple. And here's how we do it. But they got to live in it. Yeah. That really resonates because it's not academic, and it's purely life on life. And to have an 8-year-old get in your face and say, this is what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about rooting the paradigm.
Yeah, he was.
8 years old.
I know.
And our topic that was near and dear to my heart, just because of my professional work with the S curves, and in my head, you had the first 2 curves, the recovering and establishing the return to the paradigm, and then your field of rooting that, which is the theme. It was powerful conversations, but people can discount that and lose sight of why that's so important to talk about. The curves are just a tool. So how would you explain that to people, why we use the curves and what it really means?
So these are S curves that help map out, or use to map out, chart, graph the progress up a significant innovation. They typically comes in groups of 3. And when you take each curve independent of one another, it kind of starts slow. And then at some point there, you have some things that begin to happen that really accelerates quite quickly. And then over time, it slows down then again as you're solving those problems. And you're solving problems up the curve. And so this curve, the time frame on it may be 10 years, 20, 40 years. We're talking quite a long time on these curves, but that's what the curves are helpful for, is to help give you a perspective of looking across the whole thing. And so to be able to map these for our situation of bringing the way of Christ and his apostles back into the world today, the set of patterns, so helpful, Jay, because you can put thousands of problems on each curve and begin to interpret our past based on what we know. You can begin to interpret the present and really almost prophetically understand the future, because discerning the past and understanding the present is a step of interpreting the future. Mm-hmm. Of course, we're not saying we know everything that's going to happen, but with some level of confidence, you can see when things are happening in real time. You can begin to discern, oh my goodness, this fits the second curve. Mm-hmm. This problem fits the second curve. So we need to take it seriously. We need to figure out the framework of it, tie it to the author's intent, the design, and those type things. And so S curves are a helpful tool to discern where we are and give us a vision for how we need to be in it for the long haul. And again, we have a paper on it. But a paper is only useful as we dialogued about it. So we talked about it at some length, and people are using that in their discussions back home around the world as well. So I didn't think S curves were that useful 15 years ago, Jay. I thought they were.
I was stunned by that comment.
I thought they were quite useless, in fact. But as time has gone on, they have just proven to be so useful for us.
Good predictive tool.
They are.
And so you're not going to be blindsided by things. And I heard so often sitting out in the audience during the summit of, we're here on this curve. We're here on this curve. And it's not monolithic. You can be different places on different curves because it's not a linear progression through paradigm change. But I also remember it's just hearing it in Hebrews. The paradigm change they were going through. Yeah. It's the same thing. And it's the same paradigm, which is, so ironic that all these years apart, but we're doing the same thing.
Yeah, it is interesting that in Hebrews there, that fourth exhortation, he uses the word pattern, model, sketch, and the Greek word is hypodigma,
mm-hmm.
which can mean paradigm. And he's talking about the Old Testament sacrificial system was a model, a sketch, a foreshadowing of what still had to come. And so it had a set of patterns associated with it. And now he says there's a improved set of patterns. It's amazing how it fits.
You get a nice scriptural base of what we're doing, that this isn't man-made. This is all inspired by the Spirit over 2,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is maybe too deep insight into my character, but it was so enjoyable to watch the sessions.
During this global summit you're talking about?
During the summit.
Okay.
Each day, it appeared to me that you and Jeff were conversing and flexing and adapting along the way, that you weren't locked into what was going to happen 2 weeks ago before the summit started.
Oh, no.
Is that an accurate assessment? It seemed like you're very in tune with the audience and the interactions and made changes along the way so people could move more effectively.
We did make some changes, and we did make changes based on where the network is. We got a better assessment talking to people most recently. And so we pivoted on some things, and we put a big focus on moving up curve 2.
Mm-hmm.
To be specific, that's where we put the big emphasis. Well, what is curve 2? Building networks that we're still moving up the first curve, and we're still going to be moving up the first curve for decades, I think. But the season of time that we're in right now is curve 2 is only helpful if you begin to build a network of churches. And so that's we ended up putting a 10-year commitment out there for our partners to build up the second curve. And so that was that's the essence of what we pivoted to. We had that in mind in many ways anyway, but after working with a lot of leaders in the previous days, our main sessions that we ended up having in the last 3.5 days were all around second curve, expanding networks, but also stabilizing those networks.
Yeah, and I thought it was a living example of being a family, not an organization, where you're here's what we're going to give you versus what do we need to accomplish?
Yeah,
we.
A big difference.
Capital W on that we. Big difference.
Yeah.
It felt different in the audience. I wasn't in the conversations of you two making those changes, but I could tell on the outside that this is flexing and being influenced by where we're at. Dialogic,
and it's a social structure. So you have to it's not about being right. It's about meeting people where they are and developing them forward.
And you could hear people in the conversations around the tables being impacted by that. because they've heard what I said, and this is challenging me on this very point. So it became very targeted to what was needed. And yeah, just before the conference started, I may have heard you correctly, not incorrectly. Let's just skip the conference and go right to the banquet, which I understand that sentiment exactly because it's such a powerful part of the summit. But
you might be.
Why did you say that?
Okay. Why did I say that?
Why is the banquet so important to you? Not the stimulation that made you have that mindset, but why is it so important to you? Why do you see it as so valuable?
Well, we have a big meal together. The meal is done with the utmost quality. The drink is the utmost quality. Everything about it is just it's so 1 Corinthians, and it's so much. I'm talking about the framework of 1 Corinthians, 11:17 to 14:40. But I'm also talking about Isaiah. I'm also talking about Revelation, where we're going to have a big banquet feast together. I think part of the church's job is to make the invisible visible today. And I think we do get a small glimpse of all the different cultures, all the different peoples. It's a small, dimly we see, but we do get a glimpse into it. And I think that's what the banquet provides it's a banquet feast.
It may be dim, but it's powerful.
It's so powerful for us on this side. And yeah, part of me wanted to skip all the hard work and just go to the banquet feast. And so that's probably a piece of it too. Not only the elegance and the grandness of the banquet, but skipping the hard work.
And that foreshadowing is palpable. I think you can feel it. And at our table, we had 2 couples from your younger life, neighbors from down home.
Yeah.
And we had some intense conversations that were so engaging, so exciting. But part of that was foreshadowing of the feast and seeing the kingdom now. And that when you're in that double bind, if you know you're in the kingdom now and you can see the beauty of what you're in. So I think, that makes the banquet very powerful. And it is a celebration. They've done a lot of good work and moved the needle.
It's so fun for all the people that are here. It's such a big deal. We had that picture booth. We had 1,056 pictures taken at this one photo booth.
I tried to do it 7 times, but they wouldn't let me. They said I was over the ugly limit.
Well, you added to the 1,056 then, but it's also really, I just love the aspect of what it does for all of our local network and all of our local churches as well. It's so encouraging to them. They get to be part of it, but also celebrate the hard work that has been done through the whole year. It's really a culmination. It's certainly the last 10 days leading up to it, but also the year that's led up to it too. It's a celebration for everyone.
For us, locally, our network, chance for us to serve the larger network. And, I was looking around the room and your parents were there. In fact, your family, parents, in-laws, stayed for the banquet, where my wife took one for the team and drove your wife to your son's basketball game, which we knew he was going to win. So, but yeah, the commitment of our families to be there. But then, if you haven't been there, our churches serve the banquet and prepare the banquet, and to see them come out from, some of those kids can't be over 6 years, 7 years old. Out there bussing tables and taking orders and being so earnest to serve the network because they see it as a privilege, which it is. And what a blessing for us in that process. And then the meal. It was the best rib I've had in a long time.
Yeah, it was a good rib. We got pictures. People would take pictures and just have the bone left, and they were taking pictures with just the bone.
I heard that.
Yeah, there's some pretty good pictures out there. People really, you're enjoying each other. You're enjoying food. You're enjoying drink. It's Ecclesiastes 9.
It is. Yeah, it's
at the end of the day, vanity of vanities. What was man to do? Enjoy his work. Enjoy his food. Enjoy his drink.
Then you close the night, and this is fun because the little side here, quick. We talked about the 8-year-old who came up and talked about ridding the paradigm, and I was supposed to talk about the rooting, and he had his all written out a couple of weeks ago to show me at church meeting where we get together on our Sunday evenings for the gathering, and he had it written up, and then he lost it. But we made sure we made copies of it. But then he was looking. I says, "Here's mine, Eddie." He goes, "Jay, that's a lot." So he got me to pare it down a little bit, but, which I thought was so cute. But also, this is the reality that he's paying attention at 8 years old. And then our night finished with, the other end of the spectrum with Ephesians 3 prayer.
Yeah.
The other part that I thought this was...
With our most senior elder.
Yes.
With our most senior city elder.
You chose an interesting way to present that night, which my table had there was 9 of us, 8 or 9. Several people are under. Most of them, save one, were all former farmers. And so that your metaphor analogy you picked just resonated. Talk a little about your rooting presentation you gave to close the summit, and why you thought that was a good choice, and why you thought, you can't predict my impact, but it was so powerful to me. But
we haven't talked about that.
No.
Have we? This is first time. This is good. I was going to give a state of the global network. That was the plan. Is to end it all with the state of the global network and talk about where we've been and talk about where we're going. I changed it at the relatively last minute, a day or two ahead of time, because as the 10 days went on and as the conversations went on, it was clear that it wasn't as known to everyone what we mean by rooted. What do we mean by rooted? And so I spent the time just explaining in simplistic terms what we mean by rooted, but I did it around agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
I did it around agriculture. And
you'd taken them out to a farm during the summit.
I had taken them out.
First-hand experience with agriculture.
5 days earlier, we had gone out to a farm. We talked about, we saw roots. We talked about the roots of a plant, how the roots of a plant produce this kind of harvest. When you manage it, it produces this kind of harvest, versus if you don't manage it throughout the year and not intentional with your development, then you produce this kind of ear above the ground and kind of plant. We showed those different pictures. They got to crawl on a combine. They got to crawl on sit into a tractor. We brought them out to the farm. Most of them, I think almost all of them, it was their very first time. We got pictures of Algerians and of Ugandans and all, in Indians in a tractor, in a combine. They'd never been. They were so happy. These are big machines. But back to the banquet, what we used was the picture of seeding a crop, the picture of caring for a crop, the intentionality of harvesting a crop, and not boasting beyond your field after the crop, and then comparing that to growing a family, a church family, and how you need to be intentional when you're planting the seeds. When you're growing the crop in their youth, in the young stages, you need to be intentional. And the one anothering and the principles that need to be there. And you have to be intentional at every stage. And then how we have a field. We don't boast beyond our field, but we do want our field to expand. Mm-hmm. And so the parallels are just endless. But the biggest one is the roots that you're growing and the soil you grow them in will dictate what kind of crop you get above ground. And as a farmer, I know that. I've been a farmer for 47 years and been taught by multiple generations of farmers now. I stand on their shoulders. But the soil and the roots that you grow dictate everything above the ground. So if you have a set of roots that's around what I would call the Christendom or Western institutional paradigm of church attendance, church going, worship, song and praise, an event-based church system, that paradigm, that set of roots, we know what you're going to get above ground for a harvest. It's very clear what you're going to get. And so we have to root ourselves in a different set of patterns, a set of patterns that gets back to Christ's patterns, which is the letters the apostles wrote and the framework and principles in there. And above ground, you get churches as families. You get churches that multiply. You get churches that are always multiplying, but always have leaders and that are always one anothering and caring for one another, just like you would a crop. And so that's how we ended the banquet feast, and used pictures to explain those things. But it's the Old Testament, the New Testament is agrarian cultures.
You say the metaphors of the soil.
Yeah, but to be rooted, you have to be rooted in a set of patterns that the apostles gave us, and then above ground you get a bountiful, fulfilling. Jay, this month has been. You don't want to be too verbose and say it's one of the most difficult months in many ways of life, but part of it me feels that way because from on the personal injuries, end of chapters, those the intensity of the conference, the conflicts without and fears within concerning expansion locally. Hard pressed on every side, Jay.
And the timing's to distract you. It's timed to take you off task. We know you're contending, and it's a battle.
And it's a battle.
If we can distract you, that's good.
In that sense, this month has been really difficult. Seems like not a sufficient enough phrase, but really difficult. And yet, as we sit here and we talk about it and we reflect on the month, I'm grateful. It was an impactful month, and I'm grateful to be in the work, and it's fun. It's fun. It's rewarding, and I wouldn't do it any other way. So thank you for that, Jay. It's been a good month.
Knowing you too well, watching from the outside, just things that would have been disastrous. I can't remember your language around it, but when you do your journaling, things that would have been disastrous to you were bumps in the road that got your attention, but you kept moving forward all the way through it.
I call them in my journals. I sometimes call them vortexes of doom.
That's right, vortex of doom. Yeah, because I use that. Why did I use that as well? Where you just spiral down. Mm-hmm. And two things I've learned. One is your character is growing and you're maturing as a leader, but the other is your support. You have people around you that know you so well. And visiting with your wife after her knee, I knew this before I even asked her. I says, I won't ask you how you're doing because I know, but what's the important question? She goes, yep, he needs the help, not me. It's easy for her. It's just her injury. And it's just black and white for her, but you have to deal with all the rest stuff around it. So, with that in mind, I'm thinking the outro is going to have changed this month with the idea of rooting because now it's further down.
And further up? Is that what you mean?
Further down with the roots and then further in.
Oh, and further in.
I'm saying, the farther down those roots go.
Yeah.
So if we have further down, further in, let's just do further up.
Oh, yeah.
So let's say further up.
And further in, Jay, and further in.
That's all going inside my head. So thank you, Michael.
Good to chat.
And it's been a really powerful month.
Yeah.
I hope people can understand that.